rising geopolitical tensions that we're seeing really right across the board. The Biden administration has shown a fair amount of consistency with the Trump administration and taking a tougher line toward China. And so this is all happening at a time of severe global threats, really what you might call shared global threats that we really need to work together to address. And it's a very tricky time in the U.S.-China relationship. And our speakers will be addressing this because there are some bright spots in the relationship now, some aspects of trade, which we'll be getting into today. It's a tricky time for anyone dealing with China because, as we all know, the supply chain situation in the wake of COVID is severely disrupted. And in China, there are new policies under Xi Jinping of dual circulation, common prosperity. I will be talking about those in detail and what those might mean for people who want to invest or source in China going forward. So we have a lot to talk about today, and I want to get right to our speakers. We're very honored and proud to have Sue Ye with us, who will start off. Sue is the Chief Economist and Director of Market Research at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and she's also very active as a trade expert on China, helping Minnesota companies to export agriculture and food. She's one of the top experts in the country on U.S.-China agricultural relations. And next, we are very happy and honored to have John Ruwitch with us today, who is National Public Radio's, NPR's China correspondent. He's based in California. He has extensive experience in Asia, more than 19 years, has covered the waterfront in China and elsewhere. He has a deep knowledge of China and what's happening there right now. So John, welcome and thanks for joining us. And Ben Baker, who is one of the best people in the state on trade with China, supply chains. He works with Blue Dot, established their Asia operations way back in 2007, and has led their global sourcing and supply chain since 2017. He travels all through Asia, China, and around the world, actually, sourcing for Blue Dot. So he has extensive experience in the supply chain issue, which is so central right now. So we'll get started now. I just want to mention to everyone that you'll be free to pose questions through the chat function. And if you choose to do that, address them to me, Tom Hansen, on the screen there, or to everyone if you prefer. But be sure, because then I'll see them and I will pick them up and pose them to our speakers. And once again, if everyone could go on to mute, that would be helpful as well. So without further ado, then I'd like to turn the program over to Sue Ye, who will talk about U.S.-China trade and particularly agriculture. So Sue, welcome.
Okay, hello everybody. First of all, let me share my screen. Okay, here we are. I just wanted to give a quick overview or update on the U.S.-China agricultural trade. And so, you know, first of all, the two countries, China and U.S., our economies combined is close to about 1/2 of the world total GDP. So you see the significance of the two countries at least work together to resolve the trade issues. And of course, still so many things ahead of us, I mean, and work. So I just wanted to cover agricultural and food trade with China. And the impact, of course, okay, let me go to the second one. Oops. There we go. You know, a couple of days ago, there's this summit between the top two leaders. I will save that for later because I know our other two speakers will cover that. What I wanted to say, the talk was, well, it's a good start to open the dialogue. And we haven't seen a lot of concrete issues, getting worked on or resolved. But also we hear opinions from, well, I'm just hearing a lot from the Chinese side, because I read the news in Chinese. Chinese were talking. The meeting was chickens talking to ducks. They just talk their own talk. Really, there's not a whole lot of getting the message across. But anyway, hopefully in the time to come, we'll see more concrete results. Now, just a quick update on the phase 1 tracker. So these three actually charts, agriculture. So far, agriculture is the one that closest to meeting the goals set in phase 1 agreement. So we have met 82% of the goal. Well, 3 more months to go, because the data the latest we have is September 2021. So we have 1 more quarter either to catch up or to get as close as we can. Manufactured good, that's the second chart. That's a little lower. And then the third one, energy, is much lower. Okay, the next one. Now, this is the U.S. ag and food exports to China, and I'm looking at the. I'm looking at the last red bar. That's where we are for 2021. Again, that's January through September, and we are very close to target. And I want to mention 2020 actually was a record high for U.S. agricultural exports to China. So we have made great progress there. And 2021, hopefully, the last 3 months we'll see more exports. Now, China is back up. Is again our top markets for food and agricultural exports. During the trade war, 2018, 2019, actually we dropped to number 4 and number 3. We dropped behind Canada, Mexico, Japan, but now we are back up. This is 2021 data. So it's, it's looking up. And now I just want to show this one. What's the top commodities going to China from the US? You see soybeans, actually, usually Boeing airplanes, aircraft and soybeans are our top export items to China. Soybeans now is number 1 because China has not been buying our aircraft. And but again, we see the other products on the chart: pork, corn, poultry, feed, wheat, dairy. Those are the top and actually growing export commodities to China. Okay, I just want to take one kind of the soybeans, for example. The trade potential or the US export potential in agricultural and food products, I mean, we will see steady growth. I'll just use soybeans as an example. We have projected a trend for future growth. However, again, we have all the other major commodities will also see, either steady growth or tremendous growth in the years to come, because China do need the reliable and high quality products from the U.S. And I'm not going to go into the other commodities, just for example, the soybeans. Okay, this is a busy, it's a busy slide, but the reason I'm optimistic about our exports to China, I mean, these are really the headlines we've been seeing. I'll just read some of these. China signals another strong year of importing U.S. soybeans. China may import 40% more corn than in the last 60 years combined. I mean, these are just really just dynamic, happenings. China undertakes biggest ever U.S. corn purchase. U.S. corn exports hit record volume. U.S. corn sales to China are biggest ever. U.S. Wheat trade, China's wheat imports hit highest in 2 decades. And China's imports grow at fastest pace in a decade as commodity prices surge. Actually our agricultural industry benefited from, not just the China imports, the higher prices that boosted farm income. And another one here, record pork imports by world's biggest consumer, that's China. US corn, wheat, soybeans prices continue to surge. And also, this is the latest, China emerges as the 3rd largest market for US beef. Due to China's robust demand, US beef exports rose in September, set the quarterly record. And China projected to be a leading meat importer. So these are really the headlines we see. The projections by the USDA, by the WTO, by the World Bank, and so on, all point to the continued growth in our food and agricultural export to China. So I just want to end here. This is just a quick overview, and I would leave time for questions at the end of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Suye. Thank you so much for that very informative and detailed presentation of one of the real bright spots in the relationship right now. So thanks very much. And we'll turn now to Ben Baker and John Ruwitch. And so, Ben, I will turn it over to you for the two of you to have a dialogue on U.S.-China relations.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Sue. I've noted down a couple of questions I want to ask Sue later on in the hour here. So I want to just let everyone know the way we're going to do this today with John and I is a little bit different than Sue has done with the presentation, and different than you've seen me do in the past for those of you who have participated. John and I are going to have kind of a shared segment where we have a two-way dialogue. We've got some scripted questions we've worked out together that we hope will at least kind of open the door to some of these bigger topics that we won't be able to cover in entirety, of course, today. But hopefully these will spark some questions from you, or just spark you to have some takeaways to go back and do some thinking on your own about these big looming questions with all the changes that are going on, and what does it mean for the future of doing business with China. So really quickly, I for those of you who don't know me, I am the VP of Global Sourcing at Blue Dot, where I've been for 17 years. And as Tom mentioned at the beginning, I have run our China operation since 2007, when I actually lived in China and founded that operation. I now live back in the U.S. and still run that part of the operation as well as our broader global supply chain. John, do you want to quickly say hi and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm John Ruwitch. I'm the China Affairs correspondent for NPR. I've been a journalist covering China and Asia for a little over 20 years. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I have a limited but great impression of Minnesota because as a kid, I had the good fortune to be able to do some canoe trips up in the Boundary Waters. So I got some quality Minnesota time in at an early age. So happy to be here.
That's the part of our state we're all very proud of, I think.
Yeah.
Where you're living now is probably going to be a little more temperate for the next several months than where we are.
We probably won't have that much snow, to be honest. But Ben, I wanted to maybe jump in and have this sort of opportunity to say that, Sue's remarks were really interesting. And to me, the things that stood out that was sort of fascinating is that the charts about how, how strongly food and agriculture exports from the U.S. to China have rebounded. And that list of headlines was really remarkable. And this sort of the flow, just sort of the volume, the flow and the future flow of goods, going that direction and coming this direction, but particularly going that direction is kind of astounding. It made me think, Ben, you were telling me this story the other day that you might want to share about this kind of interesting way that you're cooperating with the companies in Iowa, I think, is it? Maybe to move freight.
Yeah, exactly. This, John, is along the themes that those of us in the import world have been tackling for the last year or more, is how to get access to shipping containers and to keep them in circulation for the rest of the world to use. And one of the things that we had to tackle with at the beginning of the what they call the global container shortage, which there was a shortage of containers, or the containers weren't where they needed to be when they needed to be there. And so one of the things we had to do was to change the way we were moving our freight so that the containers stayed close to the ports, because if they stayed close to the ports, they could get put right back on a ship and put back in circulation. And that meant for us changing the way we manage our inbound freight, and of course it comes at a different cost, and it exposed us to this the trucking shortage, which again is not because there are truckers that went out of circulation; it's that more goods need to be moved. So the shortage is because the increase in demand didn't keep up with the increase in supply of the truckers. And we've spent the last year with the team here just dodging the bubble. It feels like, whether it be trying to not move things through the port in Yantian, South China, and trying to move those out of the ports of Xiamen, things like this. Just any way to dodge wherever the compression in the balloon was at the time. And a recent opportunity that's been presented to us, which is part of this idea of like, be open to thinking differently, be open to not waiting for things to get back the way they were, keeping an agile and nimble mindset. There's an agriculture company down in Iowa, and I actually don't know specifically what they export, but they're in the ag industry, and they need containers to get their goods exported to China. Well, when companies like Blue Dot stopped bringing containers from the coast up into the Midwest, there was a shortage of containers for them to access to ship goods back. So they were scrambling just to get a container to fill it back because nobody wanted to ship an empty can all the way across into the Midwest. So one of the ways we're moving freight right now is we're actually bringing the goods, our furniture, all the way down to this town in Iowa, where we then transload them off of the containers onto trucks and then ship them up here to Minneapolis. That gives them the access to that container that they need without the same level of friction that folks had, that they had when the containers were all stuck on the ports. And so it's an interesting and new opportunity that when these come up, it's not the old way. It's not as simple as it used to be. It's more work for all of our teams. but it's consistent with this theme of keep your mind open, be willing to do something you've never done before when it comes to how we conduct our business, specifically with China.
Seems like a key word there is agility. You have to be able to look for innovative, sort of agile ways of pivoting and getting it done.
You absolutely do, and which brings to mind, John, the chip shortage that is a big topic for everyone right now, which is often blamed on the supply chain. But there's an interesting thing that is just kind of coming out in some of the news. There was an article in the Bloomberg Business Week, I believe it was last week or earlier this week. I don't recall exactly. Where if you're like me, you've got a car. I'm getting calls from the dealer where I bought the car on a weekly basis saying, "Hey, can we buy the car back from you?" Now they're not bringing anything worth me selling my car, but they need used cars because there's a chip shortage, which means there's a car shortage. Apparently, that's unless you're Toyota. Toyota doesn't have the same disruption in their supply chain, which is an interesting thing, because Toyota is famous for their just-in-time, which so many people over the years kind of followed. There's people who teach seminars and entire methodologies about studying the Toyota way and adapting it. What's interesting is that Toyota themselves realized the chinks in the armor on that way back in 2011 when there was an earthquake in Japan, and as a result of the earthquake, one of their main chip suppliers went out of production, and it wasn't because that chip supplier went down; it was because the suppliers to the chip supplier went down. So Toyota saw this happen in 2011, and they responded by looking at their entire supply chain, going down below tier 1 to tier 2, tier 3, meaning the suppliers of the suppliers or the suppliers of the suppliers of the suppliers, and saying, where do they have the greatest risk of exposure? Like if this goes down, which will have the greatest impact on our ability to manufacture and ship cars? And they put a whole new program in place to identify those weak spots below their suppliers and monitor the health of each of those instances. And they, as a result, now they're according to the articles, their level of stock of goods that they keep, of materials and components and commodities they keep, has more than doubled since 2011. Now a decade has passed, so does that, you can play with the statistics of that, but the point is they responded, and they kind of went away from their just-in-time logic, the agility that sort of brought them from a cash flow standpoint in particular, but responded to the exposure that it gave them. Then in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, the same company whose suppliers were affected by the earthquake in 2011 had a fire in their plant. And this is sort of like the origin story of the chip shortage. Is now obviously it's been compounded by the fact that people can't move stuff, and that adds another layer of pressure against the chip market. But because Toyota had realized that they needed to stay agile, stay nimble, and mitigate their risks in different ways, they thus far are having a much lower impact on the ability to manufacture and export autos than their competitors. And so it's an interesting thing for me in supply chain, where you especially as you're early in your supply chain career, the Toyota way is something there's no shortage of volumes of books and movies and seminars, and I can't even name the number of different certifications you can get by studying the Toyota way, and Toyota themselves is like, yeah, so maybe we weren't quite right about all of that.
Wow, that's fascinating. That sounds like that's an amazing example of a company that kind of looked into the crystal ball and was able to use what they had, figure out what's coming down the pike. I mean, it seems like a lot of, at least these days in the sort of headlines, there's a lot of issues that are affecting American businesses and other businesses in China that are out of their control a little bit? So Ben, is there, like, I mean, and an example that kind of comes to mind is this power shortage that probably everybody on this call has read about in China, where parts of cities have been basically rationed power, factories have been told to, pare down operations, that type of thing. How do you think about a problem like that, and how can you solve a problem like that in China if you're manufacturing or sourcing there?
John, to me, this is a don't panic opportunity. We've seen the impact of panic throughout the pandemic, whether it was toilet paper in whatever month that was of 2020, or these congestions we're seeing at ports in a lot of ways can be tacked up to people panicking and trying to load these ports with more goods than they actually needed because they kind of freaked out. The power shortage is one that I can't emphasize enough to not panic, because this is something that they've dealt with many times. Power management is something the Chinese government does every year. The difference now is it's off schedule. This is usually a summertime thing, especially in the South where it's really hot. They do these rolling power controls where factories are forced to shut down or to slow down production. The way the factories respond is they work a different shift. Instead of working during the day, they work at night when the power is not being controlled. They work, different days of the week. So the point is the factories have seen this before. They know what to do when this comes. A lot of them have built in their own generators to help mitigate. The workers and the factory leadership are used to having to, again, say, all right, well, we're going to work evenings this week instead of, because this is on Tuesdays, whatever date it is. So I'm not saying it's not going to have an impact. It will have some impact, but it's nothing to be panicking about and worrying about. This is an opportunity to trust our factory partners over there and know that, all right, they've been through this before. They know this way better than we do. And rather than panic, an opportunity an example of a way we can respond is give them better insight into the projection of what you're going to be needing in the future. And when they've got that opportunity to have power and to run their operation, they can be looking ahead and working ahead. They can be looking at a more efficient way to use the time they have if we're partnering with them and giving them that exposure.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So, John, I don't want to talk all about supply chain. I'm sure that more questions will come up. And there's quite a few topics about the geopolitical questions for us to dig into here. I thought it might be helpful to start this out. You've been doing news about China for a lot of years, and you spent a lot of that time on the ground in China, trying to work with sources, gather news, and we all know it as a place where information is controlled. And I'm curious, what's different now? You're not there anymore, and maybe you can start by talking about why you're not there. But you're not there on the ground anymore. Yet you still have to report on the same topics and the same people, really, that you had to talk about when you were on the streets in Shanghai and throughout Asia. What's different today versus then, both because of your physical location, but also just the geopolitical changes? Yeah,
that's a good question. So I'm not in China. We haven't been in China for 2 years. My family and I were living in Shanghai, and we went on vacation in January of 2020. And it just so happened that the week and a half we were off on vacation, the pandemic blew up. They closed down Wuhan, and I had to be back in the US for some training in early February. And we decided, we've seen these kinds of things come and go. The school sounds like they're going to delay, the return, or maybe extend the vacation by a week. So why don't we just go to the US and wait it out for a few weeks, just see how things go. And that's where we've been for the past 20 months, waiting it out. The Chinese government hasn't issued a visa for me to get back in. And as many of you have probably watched, the as the relationship has deteriorated, it's been bad for reporters and reporting in China. That's changed a little bit. I can talk about that in a minute or two. I would just say that China's always been a very hard place to work as a reporter. And I think it gets back to this sort of fundamental difference in the sort of Chinese concept, the People's Republic of China, or the Communist Party of China's notion of what journalists do versus what the sort of standard Western version of what journalists do is, right? So Xi Jinping, I believe, a number of years ago said journalists need to remember that, their last name is Party, as in Communist Party, right? So journalists there don't speak truth to power, they cheerlead for power. And under Xi Jinping, so it's always been a difficult place. Under Xi Jinping, it's just gotten harder. There's been tighter monitoring of reporters and what they do on the ground. Technology has really improved surveillance of what reporters do. So it's become harder to, for instance, show up somewhere outside of Beijing or Shanghai undetected to try to do some reporting without being harassed. They've made it harder to hire assistants in China. Every foreign news outlet that wants to hire a Chinese person to work for them has to do so through a government agency, and they're really slow walking those applications nowadays. And I would say that the this sense of what's the proper way to put this, nationalism, emboldened sort of confidence in China's ability to confront the West, I would say, has trickled down. So a lot of times as journalists in China, we're not dealing with just the foreign ministry or central government agencies. When you're outside of the big cities, you're dealing with, if you are fortunate or unfortunate enough, you're dealing with local officials. And the tone is really set at the top level. And if the tone is, foreign media are bad and they lie about China all the time, then you're much more likely to get kicked out of a town where you visit. In my case, it's harder. It's reporting on China is tough. It's always getting people to talk. When you're 7,000 miles away is that much harder. The face-to-face interaction really matters in China, as Ben, and as those of you with experience in China knows. So I wouldn't say we're in a sort of blackout period of news for China, but it's a tough spot. Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal have all had journalists kicked out of China. Those that are left, or not just those agencies, but everybody has a harder time collecting news. You get news about China, but you get less news about China and less varied news, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that kind of a setting, we had a big summit this week between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. And as we just covered, you've been covering these relations for a long time. Tell us in a nutshell what this meeting did from your perspective for the U.S.-China relations.
Yeah, I loved Sue's description of it as chickens talking to ducks. I thought that was great. I think this meeting the list of what it did is probably shorter than the list of what it didn't do. So if we look at what it did, if you think about China-U.S. relations over the past couple of years, starting with the trade war, things were pushed into sort of new, uncharted, uncomfortable territory. And then in the last year of the Trump presidency, the way I always put it, and I'm not sure if this is the proper way to put it, but he sort of unleashed the hawks on China. So they closed the consulate in Houston and sanctioned senior Chinese officials for human rights abuses, which is something that hadn't happened before. And they literally changed the rule book on how U.S. officials were allowed to deal with Taiwan, making it easier and promoting the relationship with Taiwan. What happened, I think, in this conversation between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden is that they put a floor under the relationship and changed the tone. And that's about as much as we can say has happened. There supposedly are working groups that they've set up, one on climate, which happened before this, but it was part of the sort of larger negotiations around this meeting. I believe there's going to be discussions about nuclear proliferation and nuclear weapons, but that's all in the future. I mean, how these things play out, it remains to be seen. They did not solve any of the major outstanding issues, except for journalists, which is to say there is an agreement to allow more American journalists into China and more Chinese journalists into the US. that also, we'll see how that plays out. There are hurdles in the U.S. to making that happen, so it might not be immediate. The tariffs are still in place, as was discussed earlier. And as far as I know, there's no roadmap out of that. In fact, the Biden administration, Joe Biden, in the meeting with Xi Jinping, said meeting the phase 1 agreement is still important for us. The consulate in Houston and the U.S. consulate in Chengdu remain closed. I don't know of any talks to open those anytime soon. They talked about, rules of the road, playing by the international rules of the road when it comes to trade, when it comes to dealing with whatever, the South China Sea. But again, nothing concrete came out there. There were no deals, which is interesting. Usually when there's a summit like this, there's a flurry of diplomacy in the months leading up to it, and they sign trade deals, or they sign, companies on the sidelines will sign agreements to invest in each other's countries, but that didn't happen. And then on the sort of touchstone, the kind of core, traditional pieces of friction in the relationship, human rights, Taiwan, Hong Kong, those are as intractable as ever. So I guess in a nutshell, I would say we have a little bit of a better tone. We may have a floor under the relationship, but it's still acrimonious.
Tell me what you mean by the floor under the relationship.
I mean, I think this meeting happening was a recognition on the part of both sides that it's not, having the relationship get worse is probably not a great idea at this point. Does that make sense? So putting a floor under it means they both agree we'll have dialogue, we'll have mechanisms for talking, which really shriveled over the past couple of years. We're going to try to get the basics of diplomacy back up and running so that we can talk to each other politely and thereby stave off, worsening of relations.
And is that the same thing in kind of the tone? Are you seeing? Yeah. Is it a tonal shift from Trump to Biden, or from early Xi to new Xi?
That is an interesting question. It's a tonal shift, certainly from Trump to Biden. I would say that's actually good. And within China, the tone has shifted. I think that, so when Biden came into office, my understanding is that the Chinese government was optimistic that the tone and the pace of deterioration of the relationship, these things would stop. The China-U.S. relationship would go to some version of quote unquote normal, right, the way things had been. And, the acrimony of the past would be put into the past. But Biden, as Sue pointed out, has kept many of these policies of the Trump era in place. And that frustrated Chinese officials. We heard from senior, Biden administration officials that they were very frustrated with the way the first few meetings went with China. There was no willingness, apparently, on the side of the Chinese part to discuss substantive issues, and the attitude was basically, "Hey, America, you guys broke it, and now let's fix it, put it back together." And I don't think what's happened is the Biden administration is now backtracking and they're putting it back together. I think both sides have. How do I put this? I think they've softened rhetoric enough to be able to come together and at least say, let's keep talking. But as I said, all the thorny issues haven't been worked out.
Haven't been worked out yet.
It may not be worked out. It was interesting, after the Biden-Xi discussion, an official within the Biden administration said it's kind of wrong these days to be looking at China-U.S. relations as these cycles of relations are good, relations are bad, relations are getting better, relations are getting worse. And instead, what they're sort of aiming for is a more sort of steady state where multiple things are going on at once, where we're still trading with China, where trade in agriculture is going up, for instance, but where we are honest and push hard on these points of friction in areas where we think China, needs to behave better, or where they think we need to behave better, right?
Mm-hmm. A steady hand on the tiller.
Exactly, a steady hand on the tiller.
Well,
Two ships in the night.
I remember reading that quote from Xi about the two ships in the night. And speaking of Xi, he obviously just got a big thumbs up from his party that he leads, which seems to be setting the stage for him to continue as leader of China almost indefinitely at this stage. summarize that and tell us why it's important, first of all, from like a geopolitical standpoint.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, Xi Jinping got rid of term limits for the presidency, which is one of the three key roles that he holds. He's the president, he is the head of the Communist Party, and he's the chairman of the Central Military Commission. So he's the commander in chief. The presidency is the weakest of the three, but it's a government role. So there was this formalized sort of how do I put it? There was a formalized rule around terms. For the CMC, which is the Central Military Commission, and for the party, there are no formalized terms. It's always just been it's been set by norms, right? That generally people in this reform era have served 2 terms. Hu Jintao, who preceded him, served the 2 5-year terms. Jiang Zemin served the 2 5-year terms. So Xi Jinping got rid of term limits for the presidency, and now is, according to folks who watch this stuff very closely, poised to effectively break the norm and stay on for at least a 3rd term as party chief, as the most powerful guy. And he did this last week. The Central Committee of the Communist Party had a meeting where they endorsed this, what they call resolution on history, which sort of painted the past 100 years of Chinese history as correct and as having set China on the path toward this new era of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which Xi Jinping is the leader of. And it's all very arcane and very sort of, it's arcane. You have to read the tea leaves and see which way the wind is blowing, I guess, in media, in talks with Chinese people, in other areas. But it does seem to be pointing in the direction of Xi staying on. And why it's important is because Xi Jinping, his agenda is very different from the reform agenda from Deng Xiaoping up until when Xi Jinping took over, which is very different from Mao's agenda when he was in power. And the way that the people put it these days is Mao Zedong led the Communist Party and led China to stand up. Deng Xiaoping helped China get rich, and now Xi Jinping is helping China, pushing China into this era of strength. And that's strength on the global stage, strength economically, strength across the board. A big part of Xi's agenda, and this is why it's important that he's going to be around, or everybody suspects he'll be around for at least another 5 years, is that in his 9 years as the leader of China so far, he's really brought the party back into playing a central role in the lives of people. To a certain extent during the reform era, and Ben, you've seen this, right? We were talking about this the other day. There was sort of an anything goes vibe. The party was there. The party was certainly in charge, but there were lots of ways to do business. There were lots of ways to live your life. The party has been reinvigorated under Xi, and is now, he wants it front and center in social life. He wants it front and center online, as we saw. They've limited the amount of time that kids can play video games to 3 hours a week. That's a central government edict, basically. They're trying to. There have been comments about how men should look online. No sissy looks is one of these things that the state is now trying to get in on and control. The party is supposed to be a driver of science and technology. It's in businesses. There are party branches, now in every company, state-owned, private, foreign. So a stronger party, a more assertive party internationally and at home. And there's the final point I'll say before I rest for a second is that there's a shift from the reform era under Deng Xiaoping to Xi Jinping, in that economically, his focus is now on a couple of things. Self-sufficiency is a big part of it, dual circulation, which Thomas mentioned, and common prosperity. Under Deng Xiaoping, he famously said, as we reform, some people are going to get rich first in China, and that's okay. Now, Xi Jinping is basically saying, right, that period is over. It's now time to focus on common prosperity. And in the months to come, we'll see how this unfolds.
Well, that's a topic we could probably talk about for a while, given the China that you and I lived in, where you dressed head to toe in whatever brand you were a loyalist for, whether it be Dunhill or I can't even think of the brands off the top of my head. But the theme of this hour today, John, is should we stay or should we go? And really quickly, you did a good job of setting us, explaining the difference between Mao and Xi Jinping. But I think it's, we know our history well enough to know that it wasn't until after Mao that business and international business with China really took off. And is there anything that you're seeing in the tea leaves that indicates that this future that Xi is setting up, the strength of China, is going to make it a better world for importers and exporters to doing international business with China across the border versus just within the borders of China?
I think Xi Jinping clearly is not trying to close China off, right? I think the rhetoric around reform and opening remains in place, right? They are open and they need, they're not at the point yet. And I don't know if they're aiming that direction 100%. They're not at the point yet where China can be self-sufficient. Certainly can't for soybeans, right? These type of things. Mm-hmm. So I think there will always be an open door. I think reform and opening, the party reaffirmed with this history resolution that it was a correct choice, that it was the right choice, and that it has been good for China's economy, right? Mm-hmm. And going forward, it's still going to be that way. It's still going to be an important part of the economy. I think there will be fluctuations like we've seen influenced by geopolitics, influenced by China's domestic political agenda, and whether or not that, turns its gaze towards certain industries that China feels it needs to develop on its own, mm-hmm. rather than have foreigners involved or importing. That's no different than the U.S., though, is it? I think we have similar discussions.
For sure, and I wonder if some of the indicators that Sue is showing us with the growth in their ag imports is sort of a bellwether of what we can maybe anticipate to see under this new Xi era. It's not it's a learn the new rules and learn how to adapt and play the new game. So not stay or go, but adapt.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. Can I ask you a question, Ben? On one of the things that one of Xi Jinping's, I wouldn't say it's part of his macro agenda for the next 10 years, but the way that the Chinese government has been managing the pandemic has been with this zero COVID policy, right? It's been very difficult for people to get into the country. It's been very difficult for parts of the country that have experienced cases to get back to normal, right? Or there are periods where they'll be totally locked down. From a business perspective, I don't know when the last time you were in China was, but I imagine it was a while ago. This 2 to 3 week quarantine is a big hurdle. There's probably lots of people who aren't going to China. What's the effect of that?
The effect is what I've grown to call the erosion of trust, and it's an alarm. It was an alarm bell for me when I recognized it, and now, to be honest, John, I'm still in the midst of trying to figure out exactly how to resolve it. So I'll set the stage for this. I went to China in 2007 to set up an operation for Blue Dot. One way of saying it is because we weren't happy with the service of the agency we were working with. But another way of saying it, which is probably a little more honest, is we just didn't trust them. We didn't trust the agency we were working with, and so we said, we'll trust ourselves. Let's go over there and set up an operation. And so we did. And when I got there, what I saw happening was I was there to set up an operation for Blue Dot, to represent our corporate culture, to represent our values, right, in how we do business with our partners. And what I was seeing happening in I call it the expat market is the generation of expats prior to me was these C level, or even that really very senior executives that were sent over to set up a relationship with the Chinese partner, or to set up that layer of their operation in China. When I got there, it was those folks were being sent home, and it was sort of the senior managers, the operations managers, the production managers, that level of person was the ones who were there and saying, all right, now you've kind of like going layer by layer through the company, establishing this foundation of how we do it, how we communicate, how we trust each other. And I was doing the same thing. I was training my staff and the folks we have in China to act in a trustworthy way and to represent us in a way that the folks in the US could say, oh, and I trust what they're telling me, and that they're not, just speaking on behalf of the factory. And over time, I saw this going, the other companies are going layer by layer. The managers were sent away, and now the engineers were sent in. And the engineers were sent away, and the specialists were sent in. And by the time I left, after almost 10 years, a large portion of the expat community was just sent home. There wasn't very many left. And the reason was similar to the reason why I came home, was because everything was good. We got it all set up. The culture was set in place. We trusted them. We knew what was going on. We're in a good place. And in the starting about 6 months ago, I started to recognize some concerning things among the team that I built over there. Is a little bit of like a reversion back to the comfort zone before we even went to China in 2007, of just passing information back and forth, not adding the value, sort of like operating a little bit out of like discomfort and fear, but not where we had elevated them to from where we wanted them to be as representatives of us, but to a little more comfortable and recognizable place, or what they feel was a safer place. And I am working hard within, one by one with the team to address that, discuss it, and try and resolve it before it gets to be too big. But I think an interesting question through all of this, and the layering that the Xi Jinping shift is going to have on our relationships with China, is when we think of a decision about will we stay or will we go, I don't think it's about where we stay or we go. It's can we adapt and will we adapt to what's going to be another challenging period and a little bit of reinvention of how we do business. There's no return to normal, just like in the pandemic. There's no return to normal. We're always going to be scared when somebody sneezes in an airplane. It's never going to stop. So it's a question of, are we willing, when things do start to open back up and when things start to flow a little more recognizably, are we willing to adapt to what the new requirements are, or is it just too much for us as individuals or as companies, and we go? So that's where I'm at. Is this? I've recognized an erosion of trust. I have to address the trust, rebuild the trust, and learn then where there's still weak links in that chain of trust, and decide, can I fix them, or do I have to adapt to them?
Ben, I think that's a good summing up, really, of the question that we've posed for this meeting. And you guys gave us a lot of information there. We have maybe 10 minutes or so left to have a few questions, and there are some who have come in. Suya, there's a question for you. Sort of following up on this strong Chinese demand for corn and soybeans. Can you explain a little more, kind of at a high level or in the Chinese context, why it is sort of peaking this much at this juncture? I mean, we know they need these products, but are there factors involved that would explain this sudden rise?
Yes, China has a shortage of actually feed, and now they are even using wheat for feed. And earlier in the year, China had the swine flu, so they were killing the herd. Now they are rebuilding the herd. So all of a sudden, the demand, went up. However, China's domestic, the domestic corn, the prices is higher. I mean, it's higher than the U.S. corn shipped, transportation included. U.S. corn shipped to the port there is lower than the domestic corn. So actually, all of a sudden, this corn purchase spiked. Of course, soybeans, during the trade war, of course, China was holding off buying U.S. soybeans. They went to Brazil, they went to other countries, suppliers, and then they realized U.S. corn, U.S. beans are still the best. And so actually it is more of a kind of a macro management. They also had the natural disasters and flooding and all that we have heard. So there's a shortage. Even with all this buying from the U.S., China is still increasing their purchase from Brazil for soybeans. So anyway, really we see this demand. We need to kind of make even more effort because we have the best and the most reliable supplies for China.
Right. Yes, and there's actually a follow-up question on the phase one trade objectives and the fact, as you pointed out, Suye, that manufacturing and energy lag far behind agriculture. And so this is really to all the panelists. Can you see any chance that that's going to improve? I know that, Ben, you must see a lot of people not necessarily leaving China, but in probably having to reduce their expectations on manufacturing and such. So for any of the three of you, do you see any positive signs on manufacturing and energy?
I'll say a few words. The aircraft, the Boeing airplanes, really, if China is back in the market, is going to bring it up. So that's for the manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And energy, I'm not really an expert on that, so I'll just leave that to the other speakers.
I will comment. When I talk to my factory partners in China, they frankly don't think at all about these bigger questions we're talking about. These don't bother them. The power shortages don't bother them. The container shortages are just an annoyance that they know is just going to go away. What keeps them up at night right now is the cost of raw materials, the cost of goods, the cost of buying fabric, the cost of wood, the cost of steel. So I completely lost track of the cost of steel over the last how many times it's gone up by double in the market. That's what's most painful for the factories. And I'll just make a comment about my general the higher level bellwether that I'm kind of keeping an eye on and trying to understand more about for the future is Beijing going to stay interested in manufacturing such as furniture? This is a blue collar industry. It is a dirty industry. It's not sexy. It's not glamorous. You don't get the headlines out of manufacturing furniture that you get out of manufacturing technology, that you get out of pharmaceuticals, that you get out of the finance sector. And I'm recalling several years ago when Shanghai opened up a free trade zone, and they put out the negative list of industries in regards to that free trade zone. And when you boil it down, essentially, it said if you're not in technology, you're not in pharmaceuticals, and you're not in finance, you're not welcome here in this trade zone. And I'm grossly oversimplifying, I know that, but what it didn't say to the furniture industry was, you've got a place here. You're welcome. You're welcome at the party. And that's something that for us is, I do need to keep a very close eye on. China will always be a very important part of our global supply chain, but how I use them as a resource properly that lines up with what I'm going to get support from on a nationwide basis across China and from a government standpoint is a very important thing for me to keep an eye on at a macro level while I'm listening to my factory owners who are saying what matters to them each day.
Right. You know, Ben, you mentioned finance, and it appears that China, this is one sector now where they are opening up more than in the past. The Financial Times has an article today with a graph showing that Western and US money is surging into China right now under these new rules, which, you know, it kind of, you know, as you were both saying, China's not going to close the whole door. But John, do you have any sense of how this financial opening is likely to look? I know Goldman Sachs is in now. Is this something that's going to be a game changer?
I did not hit mute. It's something that's been a long time coming, and I will admit to you that in the past couple of years I haven't followed it that closely. When I worked with Reuters in Shanghai, we covered financial markets and finance closely, and I can tell you that at that time, and this is something you probably observed as well, at that time, there was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of frustration among American businesses because there had been pledge after pledge after pledge that the financial sector would open, and it didn't open, or it opened in fits and starts. Meanwhile, Alipay, WeChat Pay, these things exploded, and companies like MasterCard and Visa, who had been promised access and weren't getting it, were being sidelined basically from the game. The opening now, I think, is real, but I don't know how big of a game changer it's going to be.
Yeah. Interesting. One last thing, we're kind of running out of time here. We won't be able to get to all the questions, unfortunately. But it's looking as if the Chinese are going to use the Winter Olympics 2022 to roll out a prototype digital currency, a digital renminbi. And, you know, all Bitcoin, all private digital currencies, my understanding, has now been banned in China. And they really are moving toward a national currency. I mean, how do you see that evolving? And do you think the Olympics will take place?
I think the Olympics will take place. I mean, the digital currency in the Olympics was there. I haven't seen headlines recently, but I do know that they have been talking about at least having it be one of the forms of payment that people in the Olympic Village can use. They've been going gangbusters on developing this digital renminbi, which is it's different than Bitcoin or Dogecoin or these other ones because it's run by the central bank. It's a fiat currency, but it's digital. My impression, though, is that it's mostly a domestic focused tool. It's not about world domination or, supplanting the dollar in global trade or anything like that. It's about having better transmission of monetary policy and having more visibility into the economy, really, into how people are spending their money, when they're spending their money, and what they're spending it on.
Yeah, it kind of becomes part of the social credit system ultimately, right?
That's sort of a huge part of social credit. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, the panopticon that they've got going here.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone over our time here a little bit. This has been really interesting. I want to thank all three of our speakers, Sue Ye and Ben Baker, John Ruwitch. It's been a great program. It's been recorded. Boy, I'd love to do this again. This was really a lot of information. So we thank all three of you. And everyone else, stay tuned for more MCBC Minnesota China Business Council events. In the future, we'll have similar kinds of panel discussions coming up in the future too. So once again, thank you to you all, and all best wishes, and see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Tom, I'll
Yes.
grab the questions that we couldn't answer and I'll send them out to the group in an email, and we can put those
Yeah.
as posts on our website and on our Facebook.
Yeah, several of them had to do with what Toyota is doing, kind of following up on that very specific question. And then also, John, there was a question of whether anybody from NPR has been kicked out of China. So we'll let you guys handle that.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah.